5 lines from the top of Chav Zayin Amud Aleph. And we've been discussing in this whole parak and the one before, what happens with the komets, where you lost part of it, where you mixed it up, where you had two kmitzas together, two isarons together. Our Mishnah continues with the general principle, which is, let's say you have a kometz, says the Mishnah, kometz mi'uto ma'akevet rubo. A small part of it ruins or is necessary for the large part of it, meaning if some small part of the kometz becomes lost or tameh or something, the whole kometz gets thrown out. And the same is true by the isaron, right? The isaron is the isaron solet that you take, the 1/10 of a eighth, I think, that you put for your flour. Miuto makev et rubo. A small part of it is makev, the majority, meaning if you're missing any small part of it, it doesn't count. And furthermore, yayin, right? When you ever have to bring wine on the mizbeach, miuto makev et rubo. Small part of it is makev all of it. Hashemen, the same thing is true about oil. Miuto makev et rubo. And not only is each individual thing needed for its size, but hasolet v'hashemen, right? Let's say, for example, with the minchat nisachim, right? You bring a minchat nisachim, you have to bring with it some oil and some flour, right? Or for truth is every mincha really has solet and shemen. Makvin zedza, they are each necessary. Meaning, if let's say you only have flour, you can't do a mincha that requires flour and oil. And as we said many times already, hakometz v'halavona makvin zedza. The kmitza, which is the small part of flour you take, and the levona, which are the spices that you put on top of it, they are ma'akev each other, and it's not a carbon if you have one without the other. Ask the Gemara, how do you know all this? And I'll give it away. I'll give you the short version. Is that generally in one second. Generally in Kudshim, if the Torah says to do something, it doesn't always mean you have to do it. It means you should do it. And in order for something to be chayav, we generally say the Torah has to repeat it. It has to be shina hakatuv la'akev. The Torah has to repeat it to be ma'akev, to say it's essential. But there are some exceptions. There's certain words, key words, that tell you that something needs to be done. And so one key word, for example, is Torah or chukah or things like that. So there are key words, okay? Okay. So it says we're my taima, we're at the beginning of the Gemara, Amarkra, malo kumso, trei zimni. It says by a kometz, take it, and it says the word kumso 2 times, and that tells you that it's essential. So that you can't take part of a kometz, you got to take a full kometz. Isaron, we said in the Mishnah that the isaron of flour, miuto ma'akevet rubo, my taima, Amarkra, misolta. Take the kometz from the solet. Now, could have just said misolet. Why solta? So she'im telling you salta is that it's an entity. It's the portion of flour. Shem chisra kol shehu psula. If you're missing any part of it, it's not what it should be. Hayayin, if you have wine, miuto ma'akevet rubo, we said in the Mishnah, because it says the word kacha, right? The word do it this way. Hashem and miuto ma'akevet rubo. And the answer is, if it's minchat nisachim, if you're referring to a mincha that's brought with a carbon, it says the word kacha. And if it's minchat nidava, when you're talking about a minchat nidava that's brought on its own, not with the carbon, Amakra, the pasuk says umi shamna. And again, that we keep learning, it's shemen, that you have to have the full amount of shemen, shim chiser kol shehu psula. If you're missing anything, it's pasul. And then we said in the Mishnah, hashemen vasolet makvin zetzeh, that in a mincha, you need shemen and solet, they come together. And that's because the pasuk, again, these are all selective quotes from Sukkim about mincha, mis solta u'mis shamna, right? From its solet and its shemen, telling you that each one is essential. And it says mi girsa u'mis shamna, which is the geras, which is just the thicker kind of grain, and the shemen. And the last thing in the Mishnah was hakometz v'alavona makvin zeh, that the kometz and the levona are essential. And this one is because it repeats it. It says al kol levonata, bring it on the mizbeach with all the spices, and then it repeats that's kol levona asher ala mincha. And so because it repeats it, it tells you that you absolutely have to do it. Okay, so that is the repetition. Comes the next Mishnah, which again is really the same continuation, but the whoever put the Gemara together split apart these Mishnayot because the previous one was all talking about a carbon mincha. And this one talks about everything else.
This is such a good one.
So it comes along the Mishnah and it says all of the things that many things, where the Torah gives you a multiple number and they are all essential. So the first example is Shnei Seirei Yom HaKippurim. We're at the Mishnah, around the third of the way down, Chav Zayin Amud Aleph. Torah says, bring 2 goats on Yom Kippur. One goes La Hashem, one goes La Azazel. If one of them is lost, you don't do the other one. It's not like, oh, let's do the one La Hashem. We don't have another goat, or bring another goat. You got to start over. Okay? So Ma'akvin Zed, they're ma'akev each other. Shnei Kivsei Atzeret. Remember on Atzeret, on Shavuos, you brought 2 kvasim, 2 kvasim are lambs, I guess, sheep, I don't know, some other animal, not a goat, and you would do those together. And again, Makvin Zed, you need to do them together. If one gets lost, you get rid of it. Shnei Chalot, the 2 Chalot that go along with the Shtei HaLechem, that go along with the Shtei Kvasim, called the Shtei HaLechem, Makvot Zu et Zu. They are essential for each other. Shnei Sidarim, the 2 Sidarim, remember Sidarim, I don't know how we translate Sidarim in English, but they are the groups of Lechem Apanim. So remember on the Shulchan, there were 2 posts, basically. And on each side, you had 6 large chalot, right? So each one is called a Seder, order of that side of the Shulchan. And so each of those is Ma'akev. Now, we're going to see later that each Lechem is Ma'akev, but for sure, each Seder is Ma'akev, it's the other one. Shnei Bezichim, remember there were 2 cups of spices that you would put on the Mizbeach, on the Shulchan. They are Makvin Zed Zed. You don't do one without the other. Hastarim v'abezichim makvin Zed Zed. The spices and the bread are Ma'akev each other. If one is missing, you don't do the other. And so let's then get to the next group. Shnei minim sheben nazir. Remember when a nazir brings their karbanot, they bring 2 types of mincha. They bring a flat mincha, like what we call rikikin, crackers, matzah, and then they bring lechem. They bring basically bread, which is regular, bread that has risen. Those are ma'akev each other. Shalosha shebipara. Remember with the para aduma, when you're supposed to dip into the blood and sprinkle it, you remember what you do? You dip eitz erez, ezov, ushni tolat. A piece of wood, cedar wood, erez, eitz erez, ezov, which we translate as grass of some sort. Ezov means grass, right? And shnitolat, which is a string, a red string. So all 3 of those need to be together. Let's say you don't have your red string, you can't do the dipping of the paraduma. Arba shebetodah, the 4 types of menachot that are brought with the todah, which we're going to get to later, but all 4 types of mincha, the mafei tanur and the marcheshet and the machavat, and the 2 types of mafei tanur are all brought together with the todah. The arba shebelulav. Now this gets to a contemporary thing, right? It's the only one that we actually do, which is the lulav, right? All 4 species of the lulav, esrog, hadassim, and aravot, they come together. If you don't have aravot, you don't do the other 3. All 4 are ma'akev each other. The arba sheba mitzorah, the 4 things of a mitzorah, Rashi says the mitzorah, 4 things are the birds a mitzorah brings, and the 3 things you use to dip, the eitzaris, ezov, and shnitolat. Makvin zetza. All of these things, if you have one, you got all of them. If you have all of them, you have it. If not, you don't. Shiva hazaot shebipara makvot zetza. Remember, with paraduma, you're supposed to take it and sprinkle it 7 times. Remember, the paraduma was not a carbon; it was bedek habayit, and it was shechted and done outside the Beit Hamikdash on the Har HaZeitim, which, if you're standing on the Kotel Maravi, is straight ahead of you, right? So the Beit Hamikdash would be in front of you. Past the Beit HaMikdash would be what we call Har HaZeitim nowadays, the mountain across the way, which is on the east side, right? And you would turn around and face towards the west in order to sprinkle your blood towards the Beit HaMikdash. So all 7 hazaot are required. And where am I? Sheva hazot makvot zozo. Sheva hazot shal bein habadim. Remember on Yom Kippur, you would come in, the Kohen Gadol would come in with the karban, with the par and the sa'ir, and he would sprinkle the blood between the poles of the Aron, all the way inside the Kodesh HaKodeshim, between the poles of the Aron, and then he would sprinkle ala parochet onto the curtain, and al mizbeach hazahav, these are many karbanot, right? The parallel davar shel tzibor, the sa'ir nasi, those were sprinkled on the curtain and on the mizbeach hazahav. Those are all makvot zu et zu. If you don't do one, none of it works. Okay, that's the list in the Mishnah. How do you know all these things? Says the Gemara, we'll go quickly at the Gemara. Shnei Sirei Yom HaKippurim makvin zeh zeh chuka, because it says the word chuka by Yom Kippur. And the word chuka is chok, it's a rule, it's got to be this way. Shnei Kivsei Atzeret makvin zeh zeh havaya. It says the word havaya, which means yihya, tiyeh, it's got to be this way. Shtei chalot of Shavuos, havaya, it says it's the same parsha. It says the same word, havaya. Shnei sidarim, by lechem apanim, it says chuka. Shnei bezichim, it's the same thing. It says chuka. Hastarim v'bezichim, that's the same thing. It's lechem apanim. It says chuka. Shnei minim sheben nazir. Now, how do you know that the nazir's two minim are ma'akvin zeh zeh? Dichtiv kein ya'aseh. It says kein ya'aseh, which means do it exactly this way. Shlosha shebet para, because it says the word chuka. Remember, by the paraduma is where the source of chuka, zot chukat Torah, right? That's where we see Parshas Chukas. Arba'a shebet toda. Well, the toda is a regular mincha, but it's itkish the nazir. There's a hekesh between toda to nazir, right? We just said nazir has to be that way because it says kein ya'aseh, right? And toda is like nazir. How do we know that? It says al zevach todat shlamav, and Amar, what does shlamav mean? The Rabbot shalmei nazir. That tells you that the shalmei nazir are a kind of toda. Va'arba'a shebemitzora tichtiv zot tihiyah Torata mitzora. So again, it says the word tihiyah, which is havaya, by mitzora. Okay, now let's pause for a second and get back to lulav. How do you know arba shebelulav, that the four minim, the lulav, esrog, hadassim, and aravot, need to be brought together? That's because it says v'lakachtem, and lakachtem, Rashi in Sukkah explains, I know that because I saw it earlier today, says that lakachtem is, you can read it as lekach tam, take all of them. Right? So it's basically a creative way to read the pasuk of take it complete, right? Likicha tamma has to be taken whole. All four parts need to be done together. Amar Rav Chanan bar Rava, says Rav Chanan bar Rava, well, slow down. Lo shanu ela she'ein lo. The only problem is if you don't have, let's say you ran out of hadassim. So don't bring your lulav with your aravot and your esrog. Avol yesh lo, but if you have all four minim in your possession or in your hand, ein ma'akvin. You don't have to put them together. You just have to have all four. They don't need to be in one unit, right? So if you have them, you don't have to tie them together. That's Rav Chanan bar Rava's opinion. Meitvei asked the Gemara, what about the following Braita? The Braita says, this is a beautiful Braita, Shnei minim shebelulav. Okay? If you think about, sorry, where am I? Arba minim shebelulav. No one correcting me there. You have four species in a lulav. If you think about the four species in the lulav, this is really a fascinating Gemara. I'll say it again because it's true. Think about what's common. What are the properties of the four minim of the lulav? So everyone's heard the story. The lulav is the spine and the smell. You got that all. Says this Braita, if you think about it, there are two parts of the lulav that are very productive, that they make peirot. And what is that? The esrog, which is a tree, and the lulav. Because what is a lulav? It's lulav. It's a palm tree. Right? So you have palms, you have tamarim, you have dates. So those things are very valuable. But you've got two parts in the lulav, the hadassim and aravot, that are pretty much useless. They're like grass. They don't produce anything. So we're going to call those the losers. Okay? So
yeah. So the word in the Torah is clearly a tamar, a date palm. Do we actually posture that it must be specifically a date palm branch?
I mean, I know in Israel we do. I've gone and picked them myself, but I don't know. Yeah, but we do today. Nowadays, when you go, I don't know if anyone's gone lulav picking before. I did it once in my life. I've gone esrog picking many times, but lulav picking only once. But you go to date palms and you cut the lulavs. That's how you do it.
Thanks.
And it's very dangerous because at the bottom there's super, super spiky parts, right? So you got to be really careful when you're doing it, or send a kid. That's what they did for me. Anyways, the arba minim shebelulav, two of them, shnai mehem osin perot. Two are productive. They make perot. And shnai mehem ein osin perot. Two of them don't make perot, right? Says the Braita, there's a message in this, that ha'osin perot yuzkukim l'she'ein osin perot. That even the things that think they're so great and mighty and they make perot, you need in life the things that you don't think are so great. And they need to be together. They need to be, you need to think of life, that there's parts that make more sense, that are more productive, less productive. They all need to be put together. And you want to take this parable even further, says the Braita. We're at the end of the first wide line, the middle line. Ein adam yotzei yidei chovato behen. A person cannot fulfill his mitzvah ad sheyekulam ba'aguda achat. You have to know this message. You have to tie it all together. You have to bring together the good things and the bad things, and that's how God wants you to serve God. Okay? And furthermore, says the Gemara, it's beautiful, beautiful Gemara. V'chein Yisrael b'hartza'ah. And the same thing is true about Jews when they're screaming out to pray, to beg God to save them. God will never save the people if only the righteous people pray. God will only answer the people if you have the good people and the bad people. And Rashi's words here are the tzaddikim and the rishaim, those who make perot and those who don't make perot, together praying to Hashem. Shenemar haboneh b'shamayim alotav va'agudato eretz yista. That you've got to bring together a diverse group of people. And diverse here does not mean diverse hair color, right? Diverse means diverse in quality of people. Tzaddikim, Rishaim, those who make perot, those who don't make perot, or God will not listen. It's an incredible statement. But back to our Gemara, it very clearly says in the Braita that you've got to tie it all together. So what do you mean you don't have to tie it all together, which is what Rav Chana bar Rava just said? Answers the Gemara, you're right. We are at the fourth of the intermediate wide lines. Tanaihi. In fact, it's a machloket Tanaim about whether you have to tie together the lulav, the hadassim, and the aravot. The esrog you don't have to tie together, but the three other things. The Tanya, as we had a Braita, and we had this Braita in Sukkah, lulav, if you take the lulav, and again, lulav means here, lulav, hadassim, aravot, bein agud, bein she'en agud kasher. Whether it's tied together or it's not tied together, it's kosher. You don't need them to be tied together. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, I disagree. A good kasher, she'en agud pasul. If you tie it together, it's kosher. If you don't tie it together, it's pasul. My time at Rav Yehuda. What's the reason for Rav Yehuda? Gamar kicha. Let me stay up front. Right? He learns kicha me agudat esov. Right? It says by a lulav lakachtem lachem biyom harishon. Right? The whole story, and it says by agudat ezov, which remember is tying together the scooper that you're going to use for the paraduma. The Eitz Era Shni Tolat and the red string, it said, no, I said that. The Eitz Era is the what's the middle one I always forget? The Ezov and the Shni Tolat. Ma lahalan ba'aguda, just like there, it clearly says you have to tie it together. Afkan, by the lulav, hadassim, and aravot, ba'aguda, you have to tie them together. So that's a machloket Tanaim, and that's why we have different opinions. And the Gemara, Rabbanan, lo gamri kicha. Rabbanan don't say kicha, so you don't have to learn one from the other. Says we're okay, that's fine. We got a machloket Tanaim, but we have a third opinion, a third Braita we're going to quote in a second, that doesn't seem to go according to anybody. If Kiman Azla Haditanya, how do you explain the following Braita? We're 5 lines from the bottom. It says in the Braita, lulav, when you take a lulav, and again, lulav means lulav hadassim and aravot, mitzvah la'ogda, the way to do it properly is to tie it together. V'im lo agdo kasher. If you don't tie it together, it's okay. Now that's neither opinion. Come on. Ik Rabbi Yehuda. If you're going like Rabbi Yehuda, he said you have to tie it. It's not okay if you didn't tie it. Lo agdo amai kasher. If you didn't tie it, why would it be kosher? I Rabbanan, why mitzvah? Then why do you even have to do it? The Rabbanan say there's no kicha. There's no source to say that you tie them together. The Torah says nothing about tying them together, right? So why would you have to do it? Says the Gemara, really, Lolam Rabbanan. It is the Rabbanan. My mitzvah, when we say it's a good idea to do it, it's Mishum Ze Eli Va'anveo. Right, the pasuk that we quote in last week in the Shirah, this is our God, and we will praise, or we will make God beautiful, that it's nicer at least, right? If you're pulling together 3 hadassim and 2 aravot and a lulav and it's flopping everywhere, it's not as nice. So if you have a beautiful sewn container that we make, put it all together, it's nicer, but it's not required. And if you don't have it, it's not ma'akev. Okay, that is the lulav. The next case, 3 lines from the bottom, is the Mishnah said, Sheva hazaot shebepara, the 7 sprinkling towards the Beit HaMikdash of the para aduma, makvot zed zed. How do you know that? Because it says the word chuka. By para aduma, it says chuka. And then we said, Sheva hazot shel bein habadim, the 7 hazaot that were done between the poles of the Aron, which was only done on Yom Kippur, and the 1 shal mizbeach hazahav, which was done on Yom Kippur, and also for every carbon of the tzibor that you do inside, right? Carbon of pnim, like the Paralon Davar Shel Tzibor, and the Sar Nasi, and Par Kohen Mashiach, those, and Sha'al Parochet, the ones that were done on the curtain, which was also done by all of those carbonot, those are ma'akvot zu et zu. Those are ma'akev each other. How do we know that? So the ones of Yom Kippur to Yom Kippur, div chuka, because by Yom Kippur it says the word chuka. And so, right, this is the chok of Yom Kippur, and so you have to do it exactly that way. And the Par Kohen Mashiach, the par of the Kohen Mashiach, which was done on the Parochet, and on the Mizbeach HaZahav, and the Parahel Davar Shel Tzibor, and the Sayir Avodat Kochavim. Those we know Keditanya from the Breita that we had in Zvachim, if you recall, this very complex Breita of the Asa Lapar, Torah says by Parahel Davar Shel Tzibor, the second parsha. Do for this par, kasher Asa Lapar, like you did for the other par. Matam, what does that teach you? Lichbol b'hazaot. It's to repeat that you should sprinkle it. Turn the page, and whenever we repeat something, that whenever you miss something, it's as if you did nothing. So whenever you repeat it, it tells you must do it that way, and that's how we know that the hazaot of the Parahel and Davar Shel Tzibor, the Parkon Mashiach, and the Sar Avodah Zara are me'akev. Okay, second line of Daf Chav Zayin Amud Bet. Tanu Rabbanan. Says the Breita, let us dig a little deeper into the paraduma. Okay, so remember with the paraduma, you're supposed to sprinkle it 7 times, towards the Beit HaMikdash. Okay, says the Breita, Sheva hazaot shebepara, the 7 sprinklings of the para, she'asan bein shelo lishman. Let's say you do them shelo lishman. So you shech the paraduma and you sprinkle it, and instead of doing it for the right purpose, you think that, you think I'm doing it for somebody else or something else. It's puzzle. Why is it puzzle? So Rashi says it's because we treat the paraduma like a carbon chatat, right? Even though it's not really a carbon, and a carbon chatas, shelo lishma is puzzle. That's what Navo was thinking. Okay, so if you do it shelo lishman or shelo mechuvanot, if you don't direct it the right way, let's say your Kohen is directionally challenged, and instead of sprinkling it towards the Beit HaMikdash, he does it sideways. Then, says the Breita, psulot, right? It's puzzle. You didn't do it right. The Torah said, do it towards the Beit HaMikdash. So that's the first part of the Breita. Says the second part of the Breita, shebifnim, the carbonot that you do inside the Kodesh, and right, the Parahel Davar Shel Tzibor, towards the Parochet, things like that, and the, where am I? Shebe Mitzorah, and remember with the Mitzorah where you would stand in Shar Niknar, and you would put the oil onto the Mitzorah. So if you do those things, where am I? Shelo Lishman, they are pasul. We'll see why about the Mitzorah. It's not so clear. But the carbonot are all chatot, right? And a shalom mechuvanot, but if they're not done the right direction, then it's kshirot. Then it's kosher, right? So remember, on Yom Kippur, you're supposed to sprinkle the blood 7 times towards the parochet. Let's say you go sideways, then it's kosher. It's not that direction you don't have to worry about. It's only the paraduma. So that's the first Breita. Says the Gemara, but there's another Breita, 6 lines from the top. V'atanya gabi para. There's another Breita about paraduma, which says, shelo lishman psulot, that if you do it for the wrong purpose or person, it's puzzle. But shelo mechuvanot kshirot. But if you do the paraduma in the wrong direction, it's kosher. So how do you reconcile these 2 Breitot? One which says the paraduma has to be done towards the Beit HaMikdash, and one says it doesn't really matter what direction you do it in. Answers the Gemara, Amar of Chista, lo kasha. It's no problem because there's a machloket Tanaim that supports this argument. Ha Rabbi Yehuda, ha Rabbanan. One Breita is Rabbi Yehuda, and one Breita is the Rabbanan. Titanya. Now we're about to quote a Breita, and we're 8 lines from the top. And this Breita has nothing to do with what we just talked about. And it goes till the end of the page. At the end of the page, we're going to come back and say, oh, this Breita is relevant for this machloket. So put aside the machloket for a second about whether when you sprinkle the paraduma towards the Beit HaMikdash, if you do it in the wrong direction, it's kosher or puzzle. And let's get to a much more complicated, well, not much more, but a more complicated question, which is, and I'm going to read a pasuk, which we're about to read in the Gemara in a second. The pasuk says the following. This pasuk is in Vayikra Tet Zayin. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe. Okay? Hashem said to Moshe, Daber al Aaron achicha, talk to Aaron, va'al yavo b'chol eit el hakodesh. Aaron should not come into the Kodesh. Now, we don't know what the Kodesh means right now, but I'm going to give you a little tip. It's probably the Kodesh, right? So remember that when you go into the Heichal, there's an outside section called the Kodesh, which is where the Aaron, not the Aaron, the Shulchan, the Menorah, the Mizbeach HaZahav were. Then there's a curtain, and then there's what's called the Kodesh HaKadashim on the inside, right, where the Aaron is. So the Torah says, Hashem says to Moshe, tell Aaron, don't go into the Kodesh. And then the pasuk continues, Mi beit la parochet, don't go where the parochet is, which is the curtain between the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKadashim, el pnei hakaporet, and don't go to the kaporet, asher al haron, which is all the way on the inside on the ark, right? Velo yamut, and then you won't die. So the Torah has 3 different places, and I'm not so sophisticated. I'm going to call them A, B, and C. Okay, there's three different places you're not supposed to go into. Okay, now the question, of course, is if you can't go into the first one, of course you can't go into the second one or the third one, right? So why does Hashem have to say don't go into all three of these places? And the Gemara is going to explain. I'm saying some of this outside because it's a little confusing inside. That in fact there's two categories here. There's a lo taseh, don't walk into a place. Though you, if you do it, you get makot like any lo taseh, but you're not chayav karet. You don't get killed, right? But then there's a deeper place where if you go in there, you get lo yamut, then you die, right? And so that there's two different issues. One is don't go there, and if you go, you'll get makot, but you won't get killed. And then there's a deeper place. Don't go there, and if you go there, you'll get killed by karet, by Hashem. Okay, so we're about to discuss between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbanan where are those places. So let's read that inside now. The time says the Braita 8 lines from the top. Mivchusrei kapara. If you have a person, remember, Chusrei Kapara means like a Mitzora, their 8th day has come, or Zav, let's say, and they've done all their karbanot, and not a Tful a Mechusar Kapara, which is a lower level of Tumah than its full Yom. So they 7 days have passed. It's the 8th day. They already went to the mikvah. They already did everything, but they have to bring their carbon, and until they bring the carbon, they're not tahar. Okay? It is. So a mechusrei kapara nichnesu la'azara, if they went into the azara, and remember a tamei person cannot go into the azara. So if it's bishogeg, if you went in by mistake, chayiv chatat, then you bring a karban chatat like any other person who did an isser bishogeg. If you did it b'mezid, then anush karet. Then it's called tumat mikdash kedoshav. We learned all about this, remember? And then you're chayiv karet if you do it on purpose. The Ein Sarach Lomar, I don't even need to tell you about the stricter levels of Tumah of a Tful Yom, Vishar Kol Hatzmeim, and all other Tamei, they're even more Tamei. And if they go into the Beit HaMikdash, if they do it by mistake, they bring a Karban. If they do it on purpose, they get Karet. That we know this. This is just a review of Masechet Shavuot. But continues the Braita, Tihorim, now let's say a person is Tahar. Yeah, and me, right? I hope I'm tar. But anyways, let's say a person who's tar, right? They go where they're not supposed to go, right? A Yisrael was maybe allowed to go into the first 11 amot of the Azara. They go and they say, I really want to see the Shulchan. And they walk straight into the Kodesh and they see the Shulchan. That's a big problem, as we just read from the pasuk, right? So a tar shenichnesu lifnim mechitzatam lehechal, right? Kulo, the entire hechal. Be'arba'im. They get 40 lashes. They get makot. But if they go mi beit la parochet, if they go into where the curtain is, which is the part of the Kodesh HaKadashim, between the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKadashim, or they go el pnei HaKapor, or they go into where the Aron is, which is all the way in, not just into the Kodesh HaKadashim, but 10 steps in, 10 amot in, or 5 amot in to the Aron, b'mita, then they're chayiv mita. Again, mita b'dei shamayim of karein, but then they're chayiv mita. So there's one prohibition for walking into the Heichal, you get makot, and if you go further, you get karet. Okay, that's the Tanakam. So again, in my example, where there's A, B, and C, if you walk into A, which is the Kodesh, you get makot. If you walk into B or C, you get karet, which is B is the parochet, and C is the aron. Okay, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, no. If you go into Kol Heichal Kulo, if you walk into the entire Heichal, and you walk into Beit Mikparochet and you walk up to the curtain, then it's Ba'arbaim, then you get Makot. But if you go into C, into the third innermost level, which is El Pnei HaKaporet, into the part where the Aron is, then B'mita. Then that's where you get Karet. So it's not, so they're arguing about the middle state. Do you just get Makot or do you get Karet? Asking Rabbi Micah Miflagi, what's the basis for the Machloket? B'Haikra, how do you read the following pasuk, which is the pasuk I read to you a few minutes ago? Pasuk says in Achrei Mot, Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, Daber el Aaron achicha, speak to Aaron, Va'al yavo b'chol eit el hakodesh, don't come into the Kodesh, don't come mi beit la parochet, don't go to the parochet which separates the Kodesh and the Kodesh Kodeshim, and don't come el pnei hakaporet, asher al Aaron, don't go to the cover on top of the ark, right? And lo yamut, and then you won't die. So Rabbanan Savri, the Rabbanan are of the opinion that El HaKodesh below Yavo. There's a lo taseh, not karet, but a lo taseh, don't come to the Kodesh, which means the outside area called the Kodesh, where the Shulchan is, and the Menorah, and the Mizbeach. But inside of that, mi beit la parochet vel pnei hakaporet below yamut. If you go into the two innermost places, then you get chiyuv of mita. That's the Rabbanan's opinion. And Rabbi Yehuda Savar, Yehuda says, no. The first two, El HaKodesh, Umi Beit La Parochet B'lo Yavo, that there's a lo taseh alone of going into the Kodesh or going into the area of the curtain, which is the area of the Kodesh HaKodashim, but El Panei HaKaporet B'lo Yamut. If you go further and you go to where the ark is, which is the Kaporet, then you actually get Chayav of Mita. So that's the Machloket. Now says the Gemara, okay, it's an interesting Machloket, and I get that you have to see there's a Machloket. Right? There's three places. You can get one punishment for one and two punishments for the other. So you could see that the extremes, no one argues about. Right? The most outer part, which is the Kodesh, everyone agrees is just Makot, is a Lotase. The most innermost part, which is the Kaporet on the Aron, everyone agrees is Karet. The middle one, they argue about. Okay. Now it says more, what's their thinking and to argue about that? So where am I? My time at Rabbanan. Why did the Rabbanan say that only the outermost one of the Kodesh is a Lotase, but the rest are Karet? Because if Rabbi Yehuda is correct, that you only get Mita if you go into the innermost one, which is the Kaporet. So why didn't the Torah say, Lichte Rachmana, let the Torah say, El HaKodesh Val Pnei HaKaporet? Just say, if you walk into the outside area, you get a lotase. If you walk into the kaporet, you get killed. That's all you need to know. The lo boy mi beit la parochet. You don't need to mention mi beit la parochet. Because Anna Amina, I would say, logically, that if you're heichal mechayav, if you're chayav for walking into the heichal, you're for sure chayav for walking into the kodesh HaKodashim, mi beit la parochet mi boy. So mi beit la parochet, the katav rachmana lamali. Why, according to you, Rabbi Yehuda, would the Torah need to say the words Beit La Parochet? Shema Mina, that you even get Mita if you go to Beit La Parochet. Shema Mina b'Mita. That's the Rabbanan's argument. And Rabbi Yehuda, what's his response? Rabbi Yehuda says, whoa. I disagree with you, Chachamim. It couldn't have said El HaKodesh and the Kaporet. Because Ikatav Rachman El HaKodesh v'lo kativ mi Beit La Parochet, if it just said two categories, don't go to the Kodesh and don't go to the Kaporet. You know what I would have thought? That that the Kodesh does not mean the Heichal. It doesn't mean the Kodesh. It means mi Beit La Parochet. That it means the curtain of the Kodesh HaKodashim. Aval Heichal lav nami lo. Maybe there's not even a lo taseh in going into the Heichal. And as I pointed out, that would be a tremendous thing for tourism, right? Imagine if people could walk in and get, for $1 million, you get a view of the menorah, right? Make a lot of money. But so that's how you might have read it if it didn't say a third category. It said El HaKodesh Val Pnei HaKaporet. I would have said Kodesh doesn't mean the whole Heichal. Kodesh means the curtain. That's the Kodesh HaKodashim. The Rabbanan say that's ridiculous. No one would have read the word Kodesh and said it's not referring to what we always call the Kodesh, right? We refer to the Heichal as the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKodashim as the inside part. So Rahu, we're at the first wide line on Chav Zayin Amabet. Rabbanan, Hahu lo matzan amrit. You never would have thought what Rabbi Yehuda just implied. The Heichal kulo ikri kodesh. The whole Heichal is referred to as the Kodesh. Never, as the pasuk says in Shmot, v'hivdila haparochet lachem bein hakodesh and bein kodesh hakodashim. In the Mishkan, you would put up a curtain that's separated between the Kodesh, which is that whole outside area, and the Kodesh HaKodashim. And so therefore, say the Chachamim, Rabbi Yehuda, you are fatally flawed, because if you are correct, Rabbi Yehuda, that a person is chayav mita only for going all the way inside to the kaporet, then you wouldn't have had to say El HaKodesh, you wouldn't have had to say three categories of the Kodesh, the Parochet, and the Kaporet. You could have just said the Parochet and the Kaporet, and I would know it's all together. So that is the Rabbanan's argument. Rabbi Yehuda. Now, what is Rabbi Yehuda? My time, or what's his reason that he says what he said? Because he says to the Chachamim, look, I don't think the rabbis could be right. Again, the opinion of the Chachamim was, that if you go into the outside most Heichal, then you get Makot. But if you go to the Kodesh HaKodashim by touching the Parochet or going to the Parochet, or you go further inside to the Aron, then you get Karet. Says Rabbi Yehuda, my time, if the Rabbanan were correct, Lichter Rachmana El HaKodesh Mi Beit La Parochet. So then you don't need the third category of the kaporet, of the aron. You could have just said, don't walk into the Beit HaMikdash, to the Kodesh, which is a lotase, and don't go into the parochet, which is the curtain, which is the karet. And then, of course, I know that if you go further inside to the aron, you're going to get karet. You don't need to say the kaporet. Vana mina, I would say to myself, with logic. If touching the curtain gets you not touching, but going to the curtain gets you killed from karet. Certainly, if you walk further inside and check out the aron, you're going to get karet. Why does the Torah say an extra category of Pnei Kaporet? Shma Mina, says Rav Yehuda, this is my proof that that's the only time you're chayiv mita. That al Pnei Kaporet b'mita, mibeit la parochet ba'azhara. That you only get mita if you go into Pnei Kaporet. Otherwise, why did the Torah say it? V'Rabbanan, say the Rabbanan, you're right. You're 100% correct, Rabbi Yehuda. Hachanami delot tzarech. The Torah does not need to say, don't go into the aron mi al pnei hakaporet. You know why it says it? Hi de katav rachman al pnei hakaporet. There's a whole nother thing going on here. The reason the Torah said, don't come in and face the kaporet is to tell you that the problem of going in is not the space. It's that you're disrespecting, this is my way of reading it, you're disrespecting the Beit HaMikdash by facing God, basically. And the only problem is if your face is to the aron. But if you walked in sideways and you didn't face the aron, you wouldn't be chayiv karet. For example, as Rashi says, let's say you dug a tunnel under the side of the Kodesh HaKodashim and you came in underneath it. Or nowadays, if you drop down through a helicopter, potentially, right? So then, limute derech mishupash. If you come in mishupash, which Rashi says the word derives from the word mishubash in a mistaken way, right? So you come in sideways or you come in underground, then you would not be chayiv karet. You might still be chayiv lotase because you're in the space, but you wouldn't be chayiv karet. And in fact, there's a braita that supports that. Ben Yaakov, as we learned in a braita from Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, it says El Pnei HaKaporet Kedma, right? It says by Yom Kippur, right? Go into Pnei HaKaporet Kedma. That's telling you, where am I? Zeb Bana'af. That is a lesson for all over in the Torah to tell you. Sorry, where am I? Yeah, that's a lesson for the Torah. Zeb Bana'af. It's a lesson that kol makom shener pnei ela eino pnei kadim. Wherever it says the word pnei, it means you're facing east. And so if you're not facing east, then you're not over the prohibition of el pnei hakaporet. You have to walk in facing the aron. If you come from the north or the south, or you come in sideways, then you're not over the prohibition. So that's why it said el pnei hakaporet. Not to tell me that that's where you're chayiv mita, but to tell me that the only prohibition is if you're facing it. So Rabbi Yehuda, and so Rabbi Yehuda is now stuck. What? So Rabbi Yehuda really needs this pasuk. What was Rabbi Yehuda's answer? Rabbi Yehuda said, you're right, but the pasuk could have said pnei kaporet. The lema kra pnei, my el. Why is it the word el with el, which means you're facing shma mina el dafka? You see that el is enough to tell you facing the thing. You don't need to say the word pnei could be extra. The word el is dafka, towards the kaporet. And the Rabbanan say El lav dafka. Then the Rabbanan say, okay, El doesn't mean that. El means towards. It doesn't mean facing. So that's what it boils down to. Does the word El pnei kaporet tell you have to be directly facing the kaporet? According to Rabbi Yehuda, it does. According to Chachamim, it does not. And therefore you need the word pnei kaporet to tell you that your face has to be in front of the kaporet. So that's what it comes down to. Ask the Gemara, now that you did this side point, which is very interesting, we can go back to understand. Before we go back, one question. Rabbi Yehuda Takamer al Pnei Kaporet Dafka. Now, according to Rabbi Yehuda, says that when it says you go towards the kaporet, it means you literally have to be facing the kaporet. What about the pasuk of the Hiza el Nochach Nami Dafka? Right? Take it back. We're 5 lines from the bottom. Let me just get back here. So the original place we started today, not today, but this question at the beginning of this Amud, was a machloket about the paraduma, right? One Braita said, the paraduma, it says in the Torah, Hiza el pnei ol moed. Sprinkle the paraduma towards the ol moed, right? It doesn't say el pnei, it says al nochach, I think. Right? It says Hiza al nochach ol moed. Okay? You sprinkle it facing the ol moed. One Braita said if you don't do it facing the ol moed, it's puzzle. And one Braita said it's kosher. Says the Gemara, you know what? The opinion is exactly like Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim, who had a machloket about el pnei kaporet, al pnei kaporet, right? According to Rabbi Yehuda, el meant you literally have to be facing the kaporet. According to the Chachamim, it doesn't mean that. The same thing would be true about the paraduma. According to Rabbi Yehuda, you literally have to be facing the Beit HaMikdash to sprinkle the paraduma, and if you're not, it's puzzle. And according to the Chachamim, it's not makev. So let's read that inside. That Rabbi Yehuda, to Amr al pnei kaporet dafka, Rabbi Yehuda is said by walking inside that it literally means you have to be facing the kaporet. When it says by paraduma that you sprinkle it towards the Beit HaMikdash, it literally means that. And if you're not, you're puzzle. And Rabbanan, midahatam lav davka, hachanami lav davka. It doesn't literally mean it there, and it doesn't literally mean it here. And so you don't need, according to the Chachamim, to literally be facing the Beit HaMikdash, maybe just sort of in the right direction. Okay? So that's a side machloket to answer a really interesting question. Now, before we get further into the question of paraduma, the Gemara has a side problem. Matkifla Rav Yosef and Amora said, I got a big problem. According to Rabbi Yehuda, that El is dafka, mida El dafka. Now, the Gersa here is very mishubash, but in mine, if you have a Bach, the Bach says Al, the word Aleph Lamed here. Al nami dafka. The word on should also be dafka. Remember, it says you sprinkle the blood al pnei kaporet hakodesh, on the kaporet, which is the layer on top of the aron. If that literally means it has to go on the aron, right? What do you do in the second Beit HaMikdash when there was no aron? El the Mikdash sheni do havi aron the kaporet. In the second Beit HaMikdash there was no aron, and it says on Yom Kippur you have to sprinkle it on the aron. So if you're literally reading that as on the aron, are you saying that you don't do it because there's no aron? Amar Rabba Bar Ula, you might have said that, but there's a pasuk that tells you not to say that, because Amar Kra, the pasuk by Yom Kippur says, "V'chiper et mikdash hakodesh." It says you're mechaper the mikdash of the holy place, and what that means is makom hamikudash lekodesh, the place that was made holy previously, even though now there's no aron in that place. So the Torah literally has to come in and say, usually you might take it literally according to Rabbi Yehuda, but nowadays you don't have to. So that is the first answer. Says Rava, I could have saved you a whole amud. I got a whole nother answer. I got a much easier answer to the contradiction where one Braita said, sprinkle the paraduma towards the Beit HaMikdash or it's puzzle, and one Braita said it's not makev. You want to have a better answer? My answer, says Rava. Rava Amar Hava Rabbanan. Both Braita are according to Rabbanan who say you don't have to do things literally. But the difference is, top of Daf Chafchet Amud Aleph, Ha dekoi mizrach umarav va'adi. One is where you're facing east, west, and sprinkling it. So again, you're on your west. The Har Zaitim is to the west of the Beit HaMikdash. You're facing towards the east, and you're sprinkling the paraduma. You're not exactly towards the Beit HaMikdash. You're a little bit on the side, but you're in the right direction. That's kosher. But where am I? Ha dekait safon of our darom va'adi. The other one is if you're going north and south. If you're facing the wrong way, right? You turn and face the Yam HaMelech, which is south, right? Then that is totally puzzle. So even the Chachamim who say you don't literally have to be facing it, you at least have to be somewhere in the right vicinity. And that's how I explain it. Says the Gemara, should we do a little more?
No.
Miriam says yes. Okay, Amar Mar, let's do it. It'll take 2 minutes. Let's just finish the sugya so we can get to the Mishnah. Shebifnim, we said the sprinkling of blood that was done inside the Beit HaMikdash, Shebe Mitzorah, and that of the Mitzorah, Shalol Lishman Psulot. If you do those not for the right person, it's puzzle. Shalom Mechuvanot Ksherot, but if you do it in the wrong direction, it's kosher. Vatanya, there's another Braita that says, Bein Shalol Lishman, Bein Shalom Mechuvanot Ksherot, then not only can you be in the wrong direction, you don't even have to do it Shalol Lishma. Says the Gemara, we're talking here about the Mitzorah. Says the Gemara, well, obviously, if you learn Zvachim, this is no problem. Because what carbon does the Mitzorah bring, Nava? An Asham. And an Asham Mitzorot. And remember, we had a machloket in Zvachim, whether an Asham is like a Chatas. Remember, everyone agrees that a Chatas and a carbon Pesach, Shalol Lishman is Pasal. There was a machloket about an Asham. So that's the machloket. Amar Rav Yosef Lokasha, Rebbe Lazar, Rabbanan. Rebbe Lazar, Demakish Asham Nechatat. Rebbe Lazar is Makish and Asham for a Chatat. So makish nami lug la asham. So he compares the oil, remember what you're sprinkling by a mitzorah, you're putting on his ear, you're not sprinkling, is the lug shemen, right? But that is part of the mitzorah. So he compares the carbon of the mitzorah of an asham to a carbon chatas, And the oil is the same as the carbon. So it's ma'akev shelo l'shman. The Rabbanan lo makish. The Rabbanan don't compare a asham to a chatas. So there's no problem of doing it shelo l'shma. Says the Gemara, that's a nice answer, but you forgot one of our fundamental principles of Zvachim, which is that you can't do a two-step thing like that, right? You can't do two steps. You learned the asham from the chatas, and now you're saying, and I'm going to learn the lug shemen of the mitzora from the asham of the mitzora. That's two steps. El Amar Rav said, Rav, you're right. That's too far. But Hava Rabbanan, they're both Rabbanan. But the question is, again, you took the oil of the mitzora and you put it on the guy's ear with the thought that you're doing it for somebody else. One kan lahachshir. One is to make sure that one is to say that the carbon of the mitzora was okay, meaning that the mitzora's carbon is okay. And Rashi points out you can eat it, right? Because what they used to do with the lug of shemen is they would take a big container of oil, they would put a little bit on his ear, and the rest would go to the kohanim for their salad, right? Or their meat, right? And so is the carbon kosher? It's kosher even though it's done shelo l'shma because it's an asham, right? But kan lahartzot for the owners. The question is, does it count for the person? And it doesn't, because since you did it shelo l'shma, you didn't do it for the right person. And so therefore, although it's a kosher carbon, remember as we said in Zvachim, kol ha-karbonot that are done shelo l'shma are kosher, ela shelo alu leba'alim l'shem chova. It doesn't count. So the same thing would be true about the oil of the mitzora. If the oil of the mitzora was placed on a person's big finger for the wrong person, it wouldn't count. You'd have to do it again. But the rest of the oil would be kosher and the kohanim could eat it. I'll stop there. Shikoach, everyone. Tomorrow, just a quick intro is going to continue with the menorah. You'll see how we got to the menorah because there are 7 branches on the menorah, and the Mishnah says all 7 are needed. If you only have 6 branches, it's puzzle. So we'll pick that up tomorrow at 7:45 a.m. in exactly 12 hours. Shavua Tov, everyone. Stay warm.
Let's do this one quickly.
Good, Joe. Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Shavua Tov.